Nearly every village has a hill. This village is Ashton, and its hill is called Bredon. Like villages up and down the country, Ashton-under-Hill in the Vale of Evesham celebrated the Queen's Jubilee in traditional country style. Up on Bredon Hill, the festive bonfire waits in anticipation of a noisy evening still to come. While down below, another chapter is being written in the story of the English village. During the last generation or two, most English villages have shared the same kind of history, a story of change. There's nothing special about Ashton's, but its story is better known than most because of the books written by this man, Fred Archer.
Those are the birds' children.
The brownies, is it?
He was born and bred, courted and wed here in Ashton. Today, at the age of 62, he looks on as another generation parades up the village street, part of the natural succession. Fred has watched it all and quietly set the story down, a chronicle of Ashton through the years, back through other jubilees and coronations, to his earliest memories as a child. His story of Ashton goes back well into the 19th century. For these early recollections, he has relied on tales told him by his mother, and on the collective memory of old Ashton. His books tell of real country people who clearly led a real country life. The Archer family have been the farmers of Ashton for several generations. Fred's father farmed the rich soil of Evesham Vale, and when he died, he left two sons to carry on the farming tradition. The elder son, Tom, took over the larger Old Manor farm, while Fred stayed on here in the family home at Stanley Farm. Here in the centre of Ashton, Fred continued farming up to the mid-1960s. But bit by bit, he sold up Stanley Farm, keeping only the old granary at the back, which he converted to a study. Here, every year for the last 9 years, he's written a new book about Ashton. Together, they make up a comprehensive and valuable chronicle of English rural life. They take us from the rural heydays of the 1880s through to the middle of the 20th century, telling a story which is typical of most English villages, a story of change, of people moving off the land and away from the country values and attitudes that Fred Archer clearly cherishes. Fred's rural nostalgia tells of real people and actual events that took place in Ashton.
The Ashton bell ringers were in the belfry. By lantern light, like their fathers before them, 5 men stood in a little circle. At John Stallard's signal, the sally end of the rope was grasped, and away went the team for the last peal of the 19th century. Up among the woodwork and furrowed wheels, where ropes had worn themselves out time and time again, the bells stood green and cold. The leather mufflers were fixed in position to muffle the sound of the bells as the old year departed. Jim Bowman's thoughts wandered to his father, ringing for the Queen's coronation, and how the 5 Ashton men had rung for 2 jubilees. The minutes ticked by until 12. "Happy New Year," John said for one and all. "And let's have them mufflers off." "Pity we only got 5 bells," added George Bowman. "If we had 6, we'd ring a proper peal to be sure." Like one man, 5 ringers pulled together, and all the bells rang out over the countryside like cannon in battle. "Keep firing 'em," ordered John Stallard. "We shan't see the end of the 1900s."
With these words, Fred Archer opens chapter 1 of his book, The Secrets of Bredon Hill, a romantic chronicle of the year 1900. Today, Jubilee Day, 77 years later, Ashton Church boasts 6 bells, just as George Bowman had wanted. But there are many other new additions to Ashton that you won't find in Fred's books, but which you will find in almost every other thriving English village. There's Willow Close, the council estate, tucked away at the bottom of the village. Most of the families here work away in nearby towns, in engineering firms. A few work on the land, on farms like Old Manor Farm just up the road. Fred's brother Tom used to run things here. Now it's passed on to his son, Charles Archer, who, like his father, still employs a few men from the village. In the centre of this stretched-out village, around the ancient cross, you'll find some of the oldest, most traditional country cottages, formerly the homes of farm workers and craftsmen, but now the country homes of newcomers to the village, people like Miss Scott, who was once a hospital matron. Now, retired to Ashton, she helps out on village committees. A little further up is Stanley Farm, Mecca for fans of Fred Archer's books and looking very much the part. The village school, small and traditional, still starts off the education of Ashton's youngest generation, with the help of a modern extension which inventively doubles as a community centre. It's now the focus of much of Ashton's village life, from a young wives group to whist drives, from amateur dramatics to yoga. Today's rural community has very much the same kind of cross-section of people that you might find in a town. And their variety of backgrounds and contemporary tastes is reflected in the very fabric of the expanding village. Not that any of Ashton's more notable heritage has been swept away. The landmarks from Old Ashton of Fred's books are still there for all to see. The new Ashton is proud of its heritage, and for the most part, proud of the wider reputation that Fred's writing has brought it. When Fred Archer's readers visit Ashton, they probably won't glimpse any of the new building, nor even the comprehensive school tucked away at the top of the village street. If they do feel unfamiliar with the modern Ashton, they'll probably make for the parish church, nowadays the most reassuring feature of an English village. It's here in the visitor's book that the pilgrim leaves his mark of respect for Fred's prolific output of rural stories, warm human stories about the simple country way of life. But few of his readers realize that it's nearly a decade now since Fred Archer left the land.
It is a wrench to give up farming, but a time comes in your life when you get fed up. Well, you get unable, I suppose, to throw bales of hay about like you did when you were younger. And the time was in this village when there was lots of casual labour you could get hold of to help you hay making. But the time arrived when nobody wanted to know anymore. They got their motorbikes, the young chaps had. They used to go off to town. They didn't want to come and throw bales about. So you got to do it yourself if you got it done, or get a contractor in, which was more expensive. So this is where the little men have gone out, I think, because you can't get any help anymore. Nobody sort of wants to know. If you were on the edge of a town, I think you'd probably get people in who were interested, but country chaps, they've seen what their fathers have been through on the land, working on low wages, and when they get to the factory, they come home at night and they're off to the pictures of the pub. They don't want to throw bales of hay about. But farming's so different. It's a very mechanised industry today. You've got to be in it big. You've got to be in big to make any money.
Fred Archer was probably right to give up farming at the time he did. Jeremy O'Byrne, who runs this uncompromising piggery in Ashton, will tell you how bad things really are today, how, when he worked in the town, he longed for a job in the open air, and how in this modern-style farming, he's found neither profit nor peace of mind. He works on his own. Regrettably, the economics of pig farming don't allow him the luxury of employing help from the village. To him, there's nothing romantic about pigs. Sprout planting would certainly have given Jeremy O'Byrne more of his fresh country air.
See a bit time for a cup of tea, Gordon.
Generations of Ashton men have been brought up on sprout planting in summer and sprout picking in winter. Today, the work is still monotonous and backbreaking. The gentle old styles of farming have gone for good, and with them, the kind of country people that Fred remembers best.
Shepherd Tidmarsh, he came to our village in 1915, the year I was born. He was a wonderful man. Well, I always called him a man and a half, because on the farm he could turn his hand to anything. I think of him now at haymaking time. The hay was never fit for him. He wanted another day's sun on it. He was very critical about haymaking, critical about everything, because it wasn't done like when he was a boy. As regards sheep, you couldn't beat him on sheep. He knew everything. He could shear 40 sheep a day with hand shears. No machines then. And when he died, I just felt I'd lost a wonderful good friend. Oh, Shepherd Tidmarsh.
Today, David Cotton lives in Shepherd Tidmarsh's old home. Honeysuckle Cottage is still tied to farming. David works for Tom's son up at Old Manor Farm, where he looks after tractors and seed drills rather than sheep. The farm is very much the same as it was when Fred and Tom were boys. Vegetables like sprouts are still the important crop.
Morning.
Morning.
Charles Archer has already won the same kind of respect that was enjoyed by his father. After the last war, 16 local men were employed here. Today, the same work is done by David Cotton and 3 others. But there's a limit to what machines can do in the countryside. And so long as the Archer family remain the farmers of Ashton, they will need men on their land. Up the road, Fred Archer kept his farm going for a time, but in the end gave in to the modern forces that have shaped our new countryside.
Good.
In 1966, he sold Stanley Farmhouse to a newcomer, Mr. Anthony Austin, who was formerly Attorney General in Barbados. Now he's come to set up home back in rural Britain. Like most of the men of Ashton, he works away from the village, but much of his spare time is devoted to its welfare. When Fred Archer sold up Stanley Farm, he knew that yet another vital link would be broken between the village and the land. His new house stands alongside on what was once the farm itself.
When I was a boy, before I left school, this village had got a population of about 365 people. And everybody, when they left school, they went to work on the land. There was nothing else to do. Just a few went into Evesham, got a job probably as an errand boy in a grocer's shop, but the majority went on the land. And they went driving the plough on the land with the horses, or with the cows, or with the sheep, or something, and pretty well everybody worked on the land. And today, a population of about 600, and there's about half a dozen people full-time employed on the land, with the women in the summertime, casual workers, doing fruit picking and that. But it's very different today. Because today, it's a jolly good job that Doughty's and Smiths built their factories at Cheltenham, because this is where the people go to work, in their cars in the morning, come back at night, and that's it.
Well, to date, it's not looking too bad. We had a total figure of £400 we wanted to make, and by my estimations, we've got about 400.
The village Jubilee committee preparing to celebrate.
Cox has given me a cheque which I've endorsed in your favour, actually in favour of the parish council, and then there's myself and Mr. Meads who paid in full.
Even if some people had been slow to contribute to the funds, most of the village interests seem to be well represented. The committee chairman, Gerald Barnett, is there because he knows and understands the village. Charles Archer because he's got the tractors and trailers. Ruth Savage because she organises well. And the others for their professional expertise.
Doing it if you draw it out of the hat. Don't you hope whoever wins coming last?
Yes, I would have thought the Carnival Queen's float could have come somewhere in the middle.
Well, isn't she leading it?
She should lead it, surely.
Well, or that she can lead it, yes.
I remember the last Jubilee, the King's Jubilee, 1935, very vividly. And I see the change in the village since then. I've seen the change the last 20 years, the last 10 years, the last 5 years. It's all changing all the time. Because the old people that I was brought up with, most of them are gone. A lot of their families are gone. The old village families are gone. People have come in from away. Well, the people who come in from away are very nice people, but they're not real Ashton people. I seem to have lost touch a little bit in the village now, because whereas I was connected with everything in the village at one time, now I knew everybody, and everybody knew me. But now I suppose I know about a quarter of the people in the village today. And I feel to me as if this Jubilee year, I'm losing out a bit. I don't know what's happening in this village all the time now. I used to know. People said, well, you've got your ear close to the ground. So I have, years ago. Had my ear close to the ground. But I don't know what's going on now so much. I suppose it's partly my change of occupation, really.
The jingle of the harness and the creaking of the wagon wheels were the only sounds in the hayfield. Mrs. Dunn sent frail baskets of sandwiches down to the men and jars of cider. After tea, part-time men came with Mr. Dunn's other wagon and helped out. As the light failed, the sweat-soaked flannel shirts went cold on their backs, and the men went home with the last load of the day.
You know, there was a sort of a community spirit in the hayfield when you all sat round and had lunch together. It's a solitary life on the land today. A lot of people look at people on the land and think, oh, piece of cake today, no work to it, but there is, you know. There's not so many people doing it, this is the trouble.
Fred Archer, farmer turned rural raconteur, entertains a WI group in a neighbouring village.
Be a farmer. He said, you'll have to farm with your feet. He said, you've got no brains, that's what he told me. And I went plough driving for old Ralph on the land. And it was an education for me, because I learned a new sort of English. How Shakespeare spoke. It was a lot better. More interesting in what we, you know, the these and the thous and that, you know. And old Ralph used to say to me, thee get up on that them horses. No, you know, no, we're going to understand what he meant, you know. That was Ralph with his surprised look, his eyebrows up. He got a pair of trousers which came up to here. You know, and a little bit of bracers over the top and a broad leather belt down the bottom. You know, and he was a spare little man, but he was wiry, and he got a bit under his belt, you know. He never sort of gave up, was Ralph. And I used to go on all day with him at play. We never stopped, hardly at all. We got old Turpin on the front. He used to push me through the edge when we were turning sometimes, you know, and he'd start shouting, et, or something like that. You know, that was to push his head off. Oh, that was coming back. And this horse language was good because he'd say to me, when he gets to the Addledon, that was the headland, he said, thee turn jinkum. That was turned to the right. When he gets to the bottom Addledon, thee turn come again. That was turned to the left. So it's turn jinkum, turn come again, et all, pushes you off, G back, come back. And this was better than I learned at the grammar school. I never learned anything like that there at all, see? This was how Shakespeare spoke, apparently. And I think it's a good thing to get things down in black and white, and before it's all forgotten. And that's what I thought when Uncle Jim died. Uncle Jim died. I thought it's not just Uncle Jim gone, it's all his memories. And they're precious. They should be kept, you know, as a precious thing. And so I put Uncle Jim's memories down, and I've put other people's memories down. And that's how I think life should be. We should remember.
When you live in the same place all your life and you don't move, when the longest time I've been away from this village was 3 weeks to have my appendix out in hospital. That's the longest time I've ever been away in my life. You sort of feel sometimes you're taken a bit for granted, I suppose. And I think people, naturally, some of the village people, they're not too happy about changing your occupation. You're typecast in a way as a sprout picker, lambing ewes, rearing calves, driving horses, mud on your boots, Wellingtons. Why should I go about with my boots blacked? That's the people think. Why should I? Why should he go to the WY and earn a few pounds with his boots blacked? You know, I think this is one of the things, you know. And also, people think that when you've written a book, you're made.
Having given up work on the land, Fred Archer, like Ashton itself, seems to be searching for a new identity. It's, after all, only 100 years since the village was the centre of the British way of life. Today, there's a real fear that it may become a contrived monument to an age gone by. But if Ashton is typical, the English village is surviving and discovering a new identity. Meanwhile, Fred explores new pastures for himself.
Sunday midnight, in moon and dew-drenched fields, Joe and Lofty trudge through June grass.
Fred! Sorry, Fred. You're sounding just a bit tense.
Fred Archer breaks into the 20th century. A recording studio is not quite the kind of thing he's used to, but he's quick to pick it up.
3, 4.
Sunday midnight, in moon and dew-drenched fields, Joe and Lofty trudge through June grass to the dim outline of dye-straight beds of asparagus.
But this scene is no more alien to Fred Archer, countryman, than would be the engineering workshops of Cheltenham.
What rules? Not to cut asparagus on a Sunday.
You ask just what it's like, but you come and see for yourself now. Yourself now.
For Jubilee Day at Ashton, the village turned out in force. Ruth and Gerald were still undecided on an order for the procession. And heavily disguised as a country farmer, Charles Archer was applauded for sticking to his rural traditions. Any village would be proud of a turnout like this. With so many villagers taking part, there were few of them left to look on. In fact, everyone agreed that Ashton had never looked so traditional. The village spirit is very much alive. Maybe in the year 2000, we'll want to look back on this Jubilee Day in Ashton-under-Hill. But we need someone with the same kind of eye for detail as Fred Archer. Fred has yet to record the village as it is today. The Ashton he should know best of all. Perhaps if he does, he'll find there's just as much to write about. Fred Archer could make a whole chapter out of the ladies and their cups of tea, or the competition for the best decorated cottage, or the scandal of the missing flag. We'll need those rural stories to remind us and reassure us of the good old days when we all celebrated the Queen's Jubilee.
This is a road.
9 books on one village or round Bredon Hill. It's quite a lot of writing, really. And the connections I used to have, the people who could tell me things, they're gone. People come to me and ask me now. I feel to be one of the sort of senior citizens, I suppose. It's very different when I could go to so many people.
As the evening wore on, the children tired. The school piano, loaded on Farmer Dunn's dray, was pulled up Bredon Hill by 2 of Harry's horses. A mixed crowd gathered, young chaps and girls, and old folk who told their tales of Queen Victoria's Jubilee. The bonfire had been built for weeks and was waiting to be lit in the dusk of May. The old men pointed out to the less informed that the fires on Broadway and Cleeve Hill, on Dover's Hill and May Hill by the distant Severn, had spread the news, good and bad, right through history. A young man played the school piano with the latest jazz, and they sang and danced in a circle round the fire, as the hill folk had done in the merry England of Elizabeth I. Fireworks streaked from hill to vale, and rockets off Broadway sparkled 6 miles away.
Gentlemen, the Queen will light your bonfire for you.
Reverend Vernon's deep bass voice echoed round the hill, and as the fire died down, they played the tune Old 100, followed with the King, until at last, one by one.
It's very reassuring that Fred Archer's description of the King's Jubilee back in 1935 should still be so fitting in our Jubilee year nearly half a century later. Maybe that's the secret of Bredon Hill.
Where's the camera?